What's up guys, today we're going to be going over the linear fusion buff that'll be coming next season. Be breaking down some of the DPS numbers, total damage output numbers, and just going over all if they're going to be meta or not next season, and if the buff they're receiving is enough. First, let's look at the Twab and what they said in the first place, and I'm going to go to link this below if you want to check it out. I'm not going to go over everything, but starting off, they kind of go over some of the heavy weapon roles in the game. It was pretty cool to see some of the same terminology that I use, for example, burst DPS, sustained DPS, single target damage, among other terms being used in this Twab, which are things I talk about a lot. So it's kind of cool to see the same terms being used from a Bungie update. Then they go over what each of the heavy weapons is kind of used for, and it kind of matches a lot of the things I talk about. Now we go ahead and skip it down to the linear fusion buff, which is what this is about. Once again, you can go and read all this if you want, but the two main takeaways is increase precision damage by 15%, which obviously almost all the time you're using a linear fusion, you're going to be going for precision hits. Pretty much just a 15% increase to their damage, and also increase the reserve ammo by 20%. So there's two different things going on there, and in this video we're going to be breaking down exactly what that'll do to some of the best picks in the game, and to see if they're going to be meta or not going into next season. But before we get into that, a quick word from this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Wondershare once again, this time with Ehroar, which is their desktop editing software. And some of you guys might not know that I've been editing for well over a decade now, and there's a lot of tough barriers to pass as a beginner with editing. The first one being the price of entry of most softwares being in the several hundreds, if not almost 1,000. And secondly, just beginning and knowing how to use the software itself. And that is where Ehroar Go really shines. First, where most softwares just give you a bunch of complicated tools to use and kind of like say, hey, figure it out yourself. Ehroar has all kinds of really nice templates to choose from, including all kinds of filters, elements, and transitions, which easily allow you to customize any type of video you want. And if you use Mac OS for editing, they also came out with a new update for Ehroar, which allows you to use one of their newest features, the auto reframe, which will pretty much just follow one object in the shot and kind of keep it in the center the entire time. And the other problem with editing software is generally just the price, but the good thing about Ehroar is if you click the link in the comments description, you can go ahead and download the trial for free and leave a comment on this video with feedback for Ehroar, then they'll choose the 3 best comments and give you a 3-month license. And eventually, if you want to just outright buy the product, it's a one-time $70 fee, which isn't that bad at all compared to most other editing softwares out there. Anyways, once again, you can click the link in the comments description and download the trial for free. Thanks again to Ehroar for sponsoring this video. Alright, so looking at some of the numbers for linear fusion rifles in the game, one of my most recent videos, which I say most recent even though it was well over a month and a half ago, was on linear fusion rifles and also threaded needle. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pull some of the numbers from that video because it's just pretty much a 15% buff to all those numbers stated, then the 20% to the reserves. The one thing to note is for threaded needle, the highest damage buff was frenzy before, and it was 20%, but frenzy is being brought down to 15%, which is interesting because that is the same as Vorpal, which means you pretty much have the choice of Vorpal, which will be way more consistent, and that will be the highest damage buff at 15% on the weapon, but you can also still use frenzy for the increased reload speed, which will be pretty nice for a clown cartridge. So frenzy won't be the highest damage buff anymore, it'll be tied with Vorpal, so I think Vorpal will be used a lot, because it'll just be way more consistent and you will always have that 15% more damage versus, you know, those higher tier enemies. So if we just talk about some of those numbers from that previous video, threaded needle on Carl hit for 45.3 thousand and that'll go up to 52,000. And the reason it's not a full 15% increase is because the frenzy is losing 5% also. So the max damage it'll hit is 52.1 thousand now. Then we look at the 1 mag and 2 mag DPS numbers. Before, it was hitting 51.5 thousand for 1 mag, and then for 2 mags, almost 45,000, which wasn't great, but I guess not too bad. And now those numbers will go up to 56.8, then also 49.5. So once again, not a full 15% increase because the frenzy 5% nerf. So not a huge change to that weapon, to be honest. It might be a little bit noticeable, but honestly, not that much. But one thing that will be changing a lot is the total damage output. With no reserves, it holds 17 right now, and that should go to 20, which means the total damage output goes from 800,000 to over 1 million. So the total damage output of these legendary linear fusion rifles are pretty good. Out of some of the other things I've tested this season, some of the swords still do a little bit over 1 million, but a lot of other options in the game do somewhere in the 700k to 900k range. So, you know, that's actually not too bad. Another weapon we showed off in that video was the sleeper, because outside of like the 3 legendary linear fusion rifles in the game, the only other ones that aren't sunset or the exotic ones. So the sleeper is pretty much the best of the exotics, and right now it hits for 61,583, and that will go up to 70.8 thousand, so quite a big jump, the full 15% this time, because obviously there's no frenzy. And that led to the DPS numbers for 1 mag right now being 54.5, and for 2 mags 44.8. So once again, pretty much right in there with what the Thread Needle was. A little bit higher for the 1 mag burst, but pretty much exact same for the 2 mag. But since this is getting the full 15% increase, the 1 mag goes to 62.7 and the 2 mags goes to 51.5. So now the numbers are actually a little bit higher than Thread Needle, but it is exotic and that will take up your exotic slot. Also, the sleeper right now holds 11, and that should go to 13 with the 20% increase. So right now it's 677,000 total damage, and that will go up to 920k damage. So once again, the total damage output is pretty strong. In that video, we also showed off the Queen Breaker, and we showed that the numbers were pretty much terrible, and there's pretty much no reason to ever use the name for DPS in PvE. So I'm not going to include that in this video. If you want to go watch the old one and do the math of 15% more, you can, but trust me, it's just not good. One thing I didn't show off in that video, which I do want to show off now, is the Arborlist, which is also a linear fusion rifle. If we look at damage right now on Carl, it's 33.6 thousand. Then if we look at the rate of fire numbers, doing both the 1 mag and 2 mags at the same time, the 1 mag will take roughly 4.8 seconds. Then the 2 mags with 1 reload will take 10.872 seconds, which means right now the DPS of 1 mag is 35.6 and the 2 mags is almost 31,000, and those numbers aren't good at all even for special weapons. A lot of specials are a little bit higher than that, if not quite a bit higher. So after the 15% increase, they do go up, you know, a little bit, but still not enough to make this a meta DPS weapon in any way. This weapon also holds 17 ammo, which means after the buff, 775k damage, which is pretty good. All these linear fusion rifles for total damage output are pretty good. So now that we know a few of the numbers of the best linear fusion rifles in the game, what is their competition? Well, in the heavy slot, there are no other legendaries that are meant to be precision range weapons. You pretty much only have the exotic snipers, and the best of the pick will be Whisper the Worm for both sustained DPS and also total damage output. So we look at damage on Carl with the Whisper, it's going to be just over 40,000, almost 41,000. And look at the rate of fire of 1 mag, which will be 3 shots, and 2 mags, which is 6. And with White Nail, you never have to reload. So 2 mags take just over 4 seconds, which means the DPS of 1 mag is 75.5, and 2 mags goes to 61,000. And after that, it will pretty much stay at that number the rest of your reserves. The Whisper of the Worm also holds 18 ammo, which means 736,000 damage, which once again just shows how strong the linear fusion rifles are for total damage output. But as we saw, the Whisper of the Worm has a lot better burst DPS and a little bit better sustained DPS than the linear fusion rifles. So if you're looking for a precision ranged weapon in your heavy slot, most of the exotic snipers will be a little bit better for DPS, but the linear fusion rifles will definitely be better for those higher health enemies that won't die from the entire reserves of these snipers. So that kind of brings me to the overall conclusion. While I do think the total damage output is definitely strong enough to be considered meta, I think their DPS numbers aren't really that good for heavies. There are a few heavies in the game that can do way higher burst DPS and sustained DPS, and those would be things like the Lament, then also the Wreck Launchers, and those different weapons can hit, you know, 80 to 90,000 for burst DPS, or even 100k depending on like the exact perk combo and some builds. Then for sustained DPS, they're usually in the like 70 to 75k range, so their DPS numbers are still way higher than, you know, these linear fusion rifles or even the exotic snipers. And even though the linear fusion rifles are going to be kind of on par with some of the heavy snipers, I mean, when's the last time you've used a exotic heavy sniper? It's probably been quite a while. So even though the linear fusion rifles are kind of fitting in with their direct competition aren't meta either. So I really don't think the linears will be burst DPS or sustained DPS meta anytime soon. But if you watched my previous video on linear fusion rifles, when I was just doing general gameplay, I said even though their numbers aren't great, they kind of feel pretty good. That's because they do a lot of damage per shot. So even though their numbers aren't great, for most enemies, you know, it might only take 1 or 2 shots to kill them, and that just feels really good, and you kill them pretty quickly because at that point you're not really being held down by the long charge rate of the weapons, which is what happens over, you know, multiple shots and multiple magazines. The reason their numbers are so low is just the rate of fire of the weapons, not necessarily the damage of them themselves. So even though the numbers aren't great, I think they will feel pretty good in just general gameplay. But when it comes to boss fights and things like that, you're still gonna be pulling out your, you know, your rockets, your swords, whatever it is. all those way better DPS options. Anyways, that's gonna be it for the video. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.